On June 4th, 1975, then heavyweight champion of the world Muhammad Ali delivered a commencement address to the graduating class of Harvard University. He started by acknowledging the irony of a man such as himself, who barely made it out of high school, to be lecturing the most prestigious body of educated people in the world. As was typical with Ali, there was bragging and clowning and airboxing. There was storytelling about his personal journey and serious talk of civil rights and oppression in America and around the globe. He then delivered a powerful lecture on what he called the qualities of the heart. Loving qualities, the manner of God himself, he said. All attributes of greatness spring from the heart. Jesus raised up sinners and the weak with compassion. He was on the side of the oppressed. Cultivating the qualities of the heart is the most important thing in life. When he finished speaking, the crowd sat stunned in silence. A student shouted out from the crowd, "Give us a poem, champ!" Ali paused and then leaned into the microphone and said, "Me. We." Now we're going to start by looking at the nature of the world we live in. What we think of as us is really a collection or a community, if you will, of organs and parts. And those organs and parts are made up of a community of cells. And those cells are made up of a community of atoms. And those atoms are made up of a community of subatomic particles. One of the interesting facts about this interdependent hierarchical construction is that everything on the atomic level and below is inanimate. There is no magic life particle or element, meaning life is an emergent property of interdependent community. Not all communities become life, but all life emerges from a community. Now, the operating system of our world seems to have interdependent community at its core as well. Our breath is dependent on photosynthesizing plants. Our nourishment dependent on other plants and animals and the rains and cycles that sustain them. Our physical and personal characteristics are dependent on our ancestors through our DNA. And our work product and lifestyles are dependent on the accumulated knowledge of civilization itself. So the construction method, or hardware, so to speak, of our world is an interdependent community or system. And the operating system is an interdependent system as well. There's one more place where we hear this term interdependence thrown around. It's the human development or maturation process. From childhood, described as dependence, to adolescence, characterized as independence, to adulthood, characterized as interdependence. Adolescence or independence is about the individual. What do I want? What do I think? How do I feel? It's focused inwardly. Interdependence, on the other hand, means an enhanced ability to cooperate with others for mutual benefits. So the final stage in our individual maturation process, interdependent adults, is also the most aligned with and reflective of the interdependent nature of the world we live in. Could it be that we collectively go through a similar development process? Do our societies and cultures mature over time? Can we see evidence of it in our history? And if so, shouldn't we be able to discern a current location in the process? And if that was all true, wouldn't that help inform our future and give us a greater ability to predict it? We're going to start our search for a collective maturation process in the year 1543, the year Nicholas Copernicus died. It was also the year his famous book was published, On the Revolutions of Celestial Spheres. But in a telling twist, it was not the year the book was written. Copernicus had written the book decades earlier, but was afraid to publish it for fear of retribution by the church. The book put forth the first supported arguments for the notion that the sun was at the center of the universe. Prior to this time, the earth was thought to be at the center of God's creation, and with man being the preeminent, unrivaled species upon the earth, well, then by extension, man became the center and object of God's intention. However, if the earth isn't the center of the creation, then maybe man isn't the singular focus of God's intention either. Or worse yet, maybe the church doesn't speak for God. In its pages, Copernicus's book was about observed patterns of heavenly bodies. But in its consequence, it was about liberation from the church's authority. Now, prior to Copernicus, the contents of people's lives was dictated by authority figures in one form or another. Food, shelter, and safety were patronages doled out by authorities to loyal subjects through jobs or other means. Loyalty and obedience were rewarded, and independent troublemakers were, well, on their own. Human and animal power were the primary technologies of the era, and that supported a dependent system because land and capital was all owned by the authorities, whether they be royalty or the church. So the only thing people had to offer was labor, and that fostered a state of dependence. But after Copernicus, things started to change. Copernicus' book turned out to be the first step in a scientific revolution, a time when the sciences broke into specialties like astronomy and physics and biology and many more. In response, the church employed brutal efforts to stop the scientists, but they could not suppress science's advancement. At the same time the scientific revolution was taking place, Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation was also taking off, as was the colonization of the so-called New World in the Americas. The New World was significant because it was too far away and too big for any European authority to control, leaving the colonizers independent of their authority. A new philosophy espousing the primacy of individuals, known as the Enlightenment, grew up in Europe and then led to the Declaration of Independence and the formation of the United States. We the people, the age of the independent citizen. And this movement towards independence benefited from rapid advances in technology in the first and second industrial revolutions, greatly increasing the production with less and less human power. From Copernicus until the second half of the 20th century, we see an era defined by cultural values for independence, liberty, and individual rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then in the decades following World War II, new worries start to emerge. The human population has risen rapidly, and the environmental consequences of our methods exceed Mother Nature's capacity to clean up after us. Pollution of the air and water, climate change, mass extinction of species, and social consequences like mass immigration and equity become dominant themes. One of the new and profound characteristics of these issues is globalism, meaning they can't be solved by independent means or by individual countries. They can only be solved through cooperative, interdependent efforts. At the same time, social justice is evolving as well. Individual rights movements like civil rights and suffrage evolve into inclusion and equity movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too. As the gulf between the haves and the have-nots separate, discussions shift to the 1% in equity. And just as technological advances rose up to support the movement towards greater independence and liberty in previous centuries, today we see new technologies increasing our capacity to network and cooperate through information technology. From dependence to independence to interdependence. This is Gene Tierney with Beloved Community Action. You know, The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. famously dreamt of a society he called the beloved community that is inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous. Despite news-generated feelings of hopelessness and chaos, a more cooperative, interdependent humanity is possible, is necessary to solve many of our most pressing problems, and is beginning to unfold right in front of us today, presenting countless opportunities for individuals and organizations of every type. Please join us on this journey of discovery and change. Subscribe and like our videos, and go to our website, www.belovedcommunityaction.org. Explore our informational materials and consider becoming a member. Thank you.